The lantern was guttering, and Desha did not bother to shield it. Rain came sideways across the dike, and a flame that small had no business surviving a night like this one. She let it fight its own war and walked on, gaff hook in her right hand, the butt of it tapping the packed earth ahead of her the way it had every flood night for 30 years. She read the river by sound first, by the look of it second. Sound told her the truth faster. Tonight the sound was wrong. It came too high up the bank, for one thing, a fat, swallowing churn where there should have been the thin slap of water against the lowest sandbag course. For another, it carried knocking in it, wood. Not the soft rolling of a log gone smooth from years in the current, but the hard, square crack of cut timbers striking stone, again and again, a sound with corners on it. She crouched at the weir stakes and put her broad hand flat to the nearest post and felt the whole line of them shuddering under the load, and she thought, without heat, the way she thought most things, "It is coming from above. Somebody's works have let go upstream." Again. "Desha!" Tennick had come up behind her, soundless even in the wet, the way he had been since they were children, and he could never stand still, and she could never be moved. His lantern was out. He never bothered to light one. He saw better in the dark than she did. Always had. And he had told her once that a light only blinds you to what the dark is trying to show. "The depth stone at the fish trap is under. Whole thing's under. I have not seen it under since the year we lost the lower longhouse," she said. "I know. I felt it." She did not look at him. She was watching the timber come down out of the black, pale shapes, planed and pale, turning end over end in the brown water. Human wood. Sawn, squared, fitted once, and now torn loose from whatever it had been fitted into. She knew the look of human works the way a person knows the handwriting of someone they dislike. "That is from the dam," she said. "Or what they keep calling a dam." Tennick crouched beside her, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the river filled the silence the way it filled everything else that night. Then the timber stopped being only timber. Something heavier turned in the current near the weir stakes, slower than the wood, lower in the water, snagging where the wood slid free, and a shape that was not square fetched up hard against the post under Desha's hand and stayed there, face down, one arm trailing out into the dark with the slack particular wrongness of an arm that is not deciding anything for itself any more. She did not move. She had pulled 3 drowned things off this weir in her life, and none of them had been a gift. The rain ran off the back of her neck and down inside her collar, and she let it, and she lowered the lantern toward the water until the small, guttering light found the shape's shoulder, and on the shoulder, half torn away and dark with river mud, the badge. A dam and a river worked in faded thread. The River Authority's Engineering Corps, the same 5-color badge that had ridden on every letter she had ever been sent and never answered by, the letters that said her petitions had been received and would be considered at the appropriate time. The appropriate time had been 20 years and had not yet arrived. "It is one of theirs," Tennick said. He said it quietly, which was how she knew he meant it. Loud, with Tennick, was talk. Quiet was the thing underneath. "Look at the coat. That is a Corps man. That is one of the men who has been drowning us by inches since before Pip was born, washed up dead on our own weir, and the river is asking you what you want to do about it." He shifted his weight. "I will tell you what I want to do about it. Nothing. Let it go. The water brought him, the water can have him back. We did not catch him. We owe him nothing. And if a Corps man turns up alive in this settlement, Desha, if even the rumor of it goes upstream, they will not send a letter. They will send men with torches, and they will burn us down to the waterline and call it law, and they will be home before the ash is cold." Everything he said was true. That was the difficulty with Tennick. He was almost never wrong about the world, only about what a person was supposed to do inside it. Desha stayed crouched over the body with the gaff hook resting across her knees, and she weighed it the way she weighed everything, slowly, turning it in her hands like a depth stone she was deciding where to set. Land law was simple, and it agreed with her brother. He is theirs. He is the enemy. Leave him for the river. Land law was for people who lived on ground that stayed where they put it. Her people did not. Her people lived at the exact mercy of moving water. On low ground, a flood could erase in a night, and you did not survive that life on land law. You survived it on the older thing, the river law, the one her mother had said back to her on this same dike with the same rain coming down. What the water hands you, you take in. You do not throw the river's gift back in the river's face. Not because the gift is always good, because the day a river clan starts deciding which of the river's gifts to keep is the day the river starts deciding which of the clan's children to keep. And a people who live in the current cannot afford to teach the current that lesson. "Desha," Tennick said again, lower. "I heard you the first time." The arm in the water turned a little with the pull of the current, and turned back, and she thought she saw the fingers of the trailing hand twitch. Not a living thing's grip, more the way wet rope shifts when the load changes. And she did not let herself believe it. She set the lantern down in the lee of a stake where it might live a few minutes more. "And you are right about all of it," she said. "The torches, the men, every part. You are not wrong, brother. I want you to know I heard you, and that you are not wrong, and that I am going to do it anyway." She stood, took the gaff hook in both hands, and turned its hook outward toward the dark water and the pale, snagged shape. "The river gave him to us," she said. "Argue with the river." She set the hook into the heavy canvas of the core coat where it bunched at the shoulder, braced her boots against the inside of the weir, and hauled. He came off the stakes all at once, the way a waterlogged thing does, dead, heavy, and ungrateful, and the river fought her for him every inch. It had wanted that wood, and it wanted this too, and it dragged at the body's legs while she dragged at its shoulders, and for a long moment in the rain it was simply Desha and the river, hand over hand on the gaff shaft, with Tennick swearing a low, steady string of curses behind her that she had heard her whole life, and that meant, under the words, that he had given up arguing and was about to start helping. He did. His hands came down beside hers on the shaft. They never spoke about it. They just hauled, brother and sister, the way they had hauled sandbags and net lines and the bodies of better years out of this water together, until the man came up over the lip of the dike and rolled onto the packed earth on his back, with the rain falling straight into his open, slack, unconscious face. He was alive. That was the first surprise, and the worst one, from where Tennick stood. A bubble of river water broke at the corner of the man's mouth, and his chest moved. Wrong, shallow, snagging like the timber had snagged, but moving, and somewhere down in the drowned engine of him a cough was trying to climb up and could not quite manage it. Lean, weathered, gone gray at the temples and grayer everywhere, the cold had got into him. A nose broken and set badly years ago by someone who knew the trick of it. And lashed across his chest, soaked through and knotted twice over with a sodden leather strap, a long roll of oiled hide that he had not let go of, that even now, raving somewhere below waking, his ruined hands were curled around, both of them, the only part of him still deciding anything for itself. Desha looked at that a moment longer than she looked at his face. They carried him in between them through the dark settlement, past the stilt longhouses with their shutters lashed for the storm, and the few who looked out their doors looked once, saw the Corps badge, and pulled their children back inside and said nothing, which was its own kind of saying. In Desha's own longhouse, the fire was banked low and warm, and the rain was only a roar on the roof. And they laid him on the reed mat near the hearth, and he began, almost at once, to shake. The deep, full-body shaking of a man whose core has gone cold, which Desha knew was not the worst sign, but was on the road to it. She stripped the wet coat off him, and Tennick stood by the door with his arms folded and would not help with that part, and that, too, was a kind of saying. The child came before either adult thought to stop her. Pip, who should have been asleep and was never asleep when something was happening, came down off the sleeping shelf in her shift, with her river-weed hair stuck flat to one side of her head, and where every grown person in the settlement had looked at the badge and seen the enemy, Pip walked straight up to the shaking stranger and looked at him the way she looked at a fish trap she had not seen the workings of yet. "His teeth are doing that," she reported, to no one, fascinated. "Is he going to die in here?" Tennick said her name, the warning version. She ignored it, the way she ignored most warnings, and crouched at the man's shoulder, well inside the distance every adult had carefully kept. And that was when the stranger's lips began to move. At first it was nothing, the loose, wet muttering of fever, words with the bones taken out of them. Desha, kneeling to bank more wood under him, paid it the half-attention you pay a sick man's noise. Then a string of it came clear, low and flat and certain, the way a person says a thing they have said 1,000 times until it is worn smooth as a creek stone. Numbers, a height, a rate of rise, and then one word dropped in among the numbers like a stone into still water, in the cant of her own trade, the word she had written in her own petitions and said on this dike to a brother who would not hear it. Spillway. And Desha went very still over the fire, the wood forgotten in her hand, and looked down at the drowned enemy the river had handed her, and felt the whole night tilt under her like a dike giving way, because those were not a soldier's words at all. Those were hers. Morning came gray, and did not so much arrive as leak in under the shutters. The storm had worn itself down to a steady, grieving drizzle, and the river outside still ran wrong. Desha heard it the moment she woke, that fat swallowing churn, unchanged. But the longhouse was warm, and the man on the reed mat was still breathing, which surprised her less now, and Tennick more. He had not left. He sat against the far wall where he had stood the night before, arms folded, a man keeping watch on a thing he wanted gone. And the first thing he said when she stirred was the same thing in different words. He lived through the night. That is the wrong way for this to go, Desha. A dead man on the weir is a grief. A live Corps man on your hearth is a noose. And you are fitting it round all our necks one breath at a time. He kept his voice low for the child's sake. Pip was asleep at last, curled at the stranger's feet like a dog that had chosen its person. Put him out while he is too weak to remember the way back. Leave him on the upstream road. Let his own people find him. His own people, Desha said, are the ones who put him in my river. She did not know yet how true that was. She only knew the shape of him said it. No blade, no soldier's calluses in the soldier's places, a body marked by work and weather, and not by war. Look at his hands, and tell me that is a man who fights for a living. Tennick looked. He was honest enough to look. "Hands prove nothing. A clerk has soft work and would still sign the order to burn us." But something in him had shifted a degree, the way the river shifts a degree before it turns, and he said nothing more while she set to work. She tended him the only way she knew, which was the way she tended a dike. A leaking earthwork and a torn body asked the same questions of her hands. Where is it failing? What is the pressure? What will hold, and what is only waiting to give? The long wound down his left thigh had stopped bleeding in the cold water and wanted to start again in the warmth. She packed it the way she packed a seeping joint in the weir, firm and clean, pressure held steady until the thing decided to behave. His ribs were cracked along one side. She felt the wrong give under her palm and bound him tight, the same hitched wrap she used on a split sandbag to keep it from spilling its load. He did not wake. He surfaced now and then into the shallows of waking, said a number, said nothing she could use, and went back under. To clean him properly, she had to deal with the tool roll. It was still lashed across his chest, knotted twice and swollen tight with river water, and his hands were still curled on it, even slack, so that she had to work each stiff finger loose one at a time, gently, the way you free a net from a snag without tearing it. "He would not let go of that all night," Pip said from the foot of the mat, awake again and watching everything. "Not even when his teeth were doing the thing. I tried to take it to look, and he held on in his sleep." Desha got the last knot free and unrolled it across the hearthstones and went quiet. She knew every object in it. There was no part of it she did not know. A surveyor's level, brass gone green at the seams, the same instrument she had no name for in his tongue, but used in her own to true a dike line by eye against the water. A depth line, lead-weighted, knotted at the spans. She had one. Hers was knotted differently. Hers measured in her clan's reckoning and his in his, but it was the same line for the same purpose, dropped into the same dark water to ask the same question. How deep? How fast? How long have we got? Sluice keys, a folding rule, a small bound book swollen shut with river water, its pages a gray brick she would not be able to open for days. It was a waterkeeper's kit. It was, allowing for the frontier between them, her kit. The man the river had handed her did the exact work she did, on the bank she had spent her life being drowned by, and the realization came in low and quiet and would not leave. Somewhere upstream, on the wrong side of everything, there had been a person standing on a dike in the rain reading the water for people who would not listen, the same as her, the same job, the same long unheard argument, and his own people had thrown him in it. Pip reached out one finger and touched the brass level, reverent. "Auntie, that is like yours, the looking thing."
He has the looking thing. Children saw function before they saw enemy. It was their whole gift, before the world trained it out of them.
"He is not a soldier," Pip announced, settling the matter for herself. "Soldiers do not have looking things. He is a you." "Be quiet now," Desha said, but there was no edge on it. She rolled the kit back up, slower than she needed to, and set it where his hand could find it. Across the room, Tennick watched her face and read it the way he read the dark, better than she liked, and he said, "What? What is it? What did you see in a box of dead man's tools that has put that look on you?" And Desha did not answer him. She was not ready to. She did not yet have the words for what it would mean if she said it aloud, that the enemy on her hearth was the one creature upstream who had been on her side. So she only knelt there with her rope-scarred hands flat on her knees, looking at the worn brass of an instrument she would have known blind, and let her brother go on not knowing for a while longer.
He could see she would not speak. That was somehow worse. "You have decided something," he said, rising, and it was not a question.
You always go silent right before you decide a thing that costs us. He pulled the door hide back on the gray morning and the wrong river, and paused there, half out, his daughter asleep again at a stranger's feet behind him. "Whatever it is," he said, "say it to my face before you say it to the clan." And then he was gone into the drizzle, and on the mat the man drew a breath that for the first time did not snag, went all the way down and held, and came back up clean, and his cracked, river-gray lips shaped very softly, almost to himself, a single new word that was not a number and was not spillway. It was no. He came up out of the fever the way a man comes up from deep water, all at once, with a flinch and a gasp, hands grabbing for something solid. Aldo opened his eyes on a ceiling of woven reed and lashed timber he did not know, smelled wood smoke and river mud and something cooking, felt the deep ache of bound ribs and a bandaged leg, and put the pieces together into the only picture his life had given him for it. Orcs. He was in an orc longhouse. He was alive, and he should not be. And the only reason the Corps put on a man's tongue for why orcs kept a human alive was a reason that ended badly and slowly. He tried to sit. The ribs caught him like a hand around the chest, and he went back down with a grunt, already reaching across himself for the tool roll out of pure animal habit, and found it there, by his hand, untaken. That stopped him more than the pain did. "You are awake." The voice came from a woman by the fire, tall, even kneeling, gray-green, iron-gray hair coiled and pinned with bone, watching him with steady, dark eyes that did not measure him the way he expected to be measured. He braced for it anyway. 20 years of Corps barracks talk had told him what those eyes wanted. None of it came. She only said, in his own language, slow and accented but plain, "You were 3 days in the fever. Your leg is closed. Your ribs are bound. Drink before you talk." And she set a clay cup down within his reach, and did not push it on him, which was its own strange thing, and went back to her work as if a human waking in her house were a chore she had budgeted for. He did not drink. He watched her. "What do you want from me?" he said. His voice came out of ruin. "Ransom. You want to trade me up the line. Or—" He stopped. The other thing was harder to say, and he was a plain man. He said it. "Or you kept me alive so it would last longer. I have heard what your kind—" And there he stopped again, because the small one was suddenly crouched at his shoulder, gap-toothed, fearless, holding his own brass level up into the firelight with the grave care of a child showing a treasure. "This is the looking thing," Pip informed him. "Auntie has one. You trew the line with it, against the water, so the dike sits flat. I am not supposed to touch it, but I held it very careful." She turned it so the green-gone seams caught the light. "You read water," she said, as if confirming a thing she already knew. "Same as her. I told them you were a U and not a soldier, and I was right." She said it without triumph, simply as fact, and went back to settling the instrument exactly where she had found it. Something in Aldo came loose that the cold and the ribs had not touched. He had braced his whole waking for monsters. He had the words for monsters ready in his mouth. And instead, an 8-year-old had just explained his own surveyor's level back to him, correctly, in the dark of an enemy house, and called him a water reader as though that were the most natural thing a man could be. He looked from the child to the woman who had not turned around,
who was packing something at the hearth with broad, scarred hands that moved the way his own moved when they had work, and he heard himself ask the only question left. "Why did you pull me out?" Desha set down what she hound. She came and sat on her heels near him, not too near, and for a moment she looked at him the way she'd look at the river before deciding it. "You came down on my weir in the storm," she said. "Snagged on the stakes. My brother said leave you, said you were one of theirs, and that a Corps man on our hearth would bring the torches down on us, and he was right about all of it." She let that sit, honest. "Our oldest law is older than your war. The river keeps no sides."
What the water hands you, you take in. Because the day a river people starts throwing the river's gifts back is the day the river starts keeping their children. So I hooked your coat, and I hauled. That is the whole of it. A pause. You want a reason with sense in it. I do not have one. Argue with the river. I gave my brother the same answer, and he liked it no better than you. He had no idea what to do with that. In his world, a thing was done because it profited someone or punished someone. Nobody pulled a stranger from a flood on the strength of a law that simply said, "Do not throw water back at water." And yet here was the bound leg, and the untaken tools, and a child who knew his trade. He drank, finally, because there was nothing in the cup but water, and because his body had had enough of refusing things. While he drank, he let his eyes go past her to the open door flap, to the gray morning beyond, and the engineer in him, the part that could not be drowned out of him, the part that had got him killed, woke up and started doing the only thing it knew how to do. He looked at their dike. He could see a long run of it from where he lay, earthwork and sandbag and hand-driven stakes, and it was good work, honest work, the work of people who had built it by hand and rebuilt it with their grief. And it would not hold. He read it the way he read a page. The slump in the upstream face where the toe was undercutting, the freeboard already too low for a river running that high, the whole line of it built to stand against the ordinary flood, and the ordinary flood only. He read the river next, the rate of it, the human timbers still riding it down, and he felt the cold come back into him that had nothing to do with the water. He knew that water. He knew exactly where that timber had torn loose, because he had spent 2 years filing reports about the thing it had torn loose from, and he had been put into a flood for those reports by men who wore his own badge. "That dike will not hold," he said. His voice had changed. Even the woman heard it change. He pushed himself up against the rib's protest, far enough to see her face. "How long has the river been running like this? Today's height. Is it higher than yesterday?" She told him, higher. He shut his eyes. "It is going to keep rising," he said. "And your dike is built for a flood that is not coming, because the flood that is coming is bigger. And I know exactly how much bigger, and I know why." He opened his eyes on her steady dark ones, and on the child between them, holding her breath. "The dam upstream is failing. It has been failing for years. I am the man who kept saying so." The word came up out of him flat and final, the same word he'd said in the fever, the word that had been hers all along. "The spillway is gone. That timber in your river is the spillway. It already started, and when the rest of it lets go, it comes here, straight down onto this low ground, onto these long houses, and there is not a sandbag in this settlement set in the right place to stop it." For a long moment, nobody in the longhouse moved, and the only sound was the wrong river through the open door, saying the same thing Aldo had just said, in the only language it had. Then Desha got up, crossed to the wall where her own kit hung, and brought back the thing she had never once shown to a human. The flood record cord. She laid it across the hearthstones beside his tool roll, and Aldo, propped on one elbow, understood what he was looking at before she explained it, because it was his ledger built in another grammar. A long keeper's cord strung with carved depth stones, each stone a flood, each notch a height. Generations of them, the clan's whole memory of the water, knotted into a line you could hold in 2 hands. "We keep the river here," Desha said, running a scarred thumb down it. "This one, my mother's mark, the year the lower longhouse went. This one, mine, the year after. This one." She stopped on a stone darker than the rest, worn from handling. "4 winters back. The worst we have living memory of. The water came up past every mark above it, and we lost—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Tennick had come in silent at the door and was standing very still. "And every flood on that cord," Aldo said slowly, "every one of these worst ever marks, they have come faster, closer together, each one bigger than the law of the river should allow." It was not a question. It was the shape of his own data, read off a string of carved stones. "Because it is not the river doing it, it is the dam. A failing dam does not just break once. It leaks worse every season, holds back less, lets through more, until the year it goes entirely." He looked at the dark worn stone, the 4 winters one, the one she had not finished a sentence about. "I filed reports on all of these," he said quietly, "from the other side. I have a book swollen shut with them in that roll. The maintenance money was stolen. A contractor with friends, skimming the dam budget for years, who did not want an inspection that would prove it. I kept proving it. I kept telling them what your stones are telling you." His jaw worked. "And 4 winters ago I told them the dam would take the low ground below it, and they filed my report at the appropriate time. And the appropriate time has still not come." Desha brought out the other thing then, a flat bundle of papers, brown and water-foxed, kept dry where she kept what mattered. Petitions. Her own in a clerk's translated hand, copies of 20 years of asking the River Authority to maintain the dam that hung over her people, and clipped to each its identical answer. Received will be considered. The same 5-color badge in the corner that rode on Aldo's torn shoulder. He took them in his ruined hands and read the dates. and the symmetry came down on both of them at once, and had a weight to it neither could have lifted alone. Two water-keepers. The same job on two banks of one prejudice. The same warnings. The same indifferent authority that had answered both of them with the same dead sentence, and counted neither of them as people whose drowning was worth a clerk's afternoon. He had thought he was the only one shouting into that silence. He had been one of two, and the other had been the enemy. "You fought my fight," Desha said. It was the first thing in her voice he could not read. "From the top of the wall that was killing us. You stood on the side that drowns us, and you tried to stop it drowning us. And they drowned you for it." She looked at her brother. "That is the man you wanted to put on the upstream road." Tenek had not moved from the door. He had been listening the whole time with his arms folded and his jaw set, building, Aldo could see, every honest case there was to build, and Aldo watched the case fall apart in him in real time, watched him take up the dark, worn depth stone, the 4 Winters one, and turn it in his fingers, and go a color under the gray-green that Aldo did not have a name for. When he spoke, his voice had no fight left in it, only the flat under thing, the quiet one. "4 winters back," Tenek said. "The worst on the cord." He did not look up from the stone. "My wife took the children to the high ground when the water turned. She got back all but one." He set the stone down very carefully, as if it might break, or as if he might. "My daughter, the little one, Pip's sister. We never—" The river finished that sentence too. "The water came up past every mark, you said. Past every mark because the dam let it. Because some man upstream stole the coin that would have held it." He looked at last at Aldo, not with hate, which would have been easier for both of them, but with something rawer. "And you," he said. "You are the one man on the whole of their side who stood up and tried to stop the thing that took her. And they killed you for it. And the river handed you to my sister's hook." A sound came out of him that was almost a laugh, and was not one. "I wanted to throw you back." Pip had gone very still at the word sister, the way children go still at a door they are usually kept on the wrong side of. Aldo could not speak. There was nothing a man could say to that, and he had the grace not to try. Tenek stood a moment longer holding the whole impossible shape of it, that the enemy he'd have drowned was his ally, that his daughter's death had a name, and the name was a coin and a contract and a comfortable man upstream. And then he turned without another word and pushed out through the door-hide into the gray, and the rain took him. He did not come back that day. He sat out on the dike in the drizzle, alone, where his sister could see him from the door if she went to it, a lean, dark shape against the wrong river, not working, not moving, just sitting with the water that had taken his child and the new, unbearable knowledge of who had tried to save her. Inside, Desha gathered the petitions and the cord back up with hands that were not quite steady. Aldo lay back against the ribs' deep ache and stared at the reed ceiling, and somewhere under the grief and the cold, a different thing was waking in him, the old thing, the thing that could not stand to watch a thing break that he knew how to fix. And he looked again, sideways, through the door, at the long, failing run of their dike, and began, almost against his own will, to do the arithmetic of how much time they had left. The arithmetic would not leave him alone, so on the second morning he made them carry him out to the dike to do it properly. Desha argued briefly on the matter of his ribs,
Aldo answered that a man could read a dike sitting down, and would do it lying down if he had to, and she heard in that the same stubbornness she met in her own mirror, and stopped arguing. They set him on a low stool at the foot of the earthwork, with his tool roll across his knees, and for the first time since the river had handed him over, Aldo's hands had something to do, and the doing of it changed his whole face.
He set up the brass level first. "The looking thing," Pip announced to anyone within reach, and sighted along the dike line, and what he saw he did not like, and said so plainly, the way he'd been trained to say things to men who did not want to hear them. The crown of the dike sagged a hand's width over its middle third. He could see daylight in the slump where there should have been a true flat line. "Your line dips here," he told Desha, who had crouched at his shoulder to watch the instrument do its work. "Right where the old longhouse posts are. The ground under it is settling, and you have been topping it up with sandbags season after season, which is the right thing to do and also why it keeps sinking. You are loading a soft spot." She grunted, the grunt of a keeper hearing a true thing she had half known and not had the words for. He handed her the level. "Sight it yourself. Tell me I'm wrong." She sighted it. She was not wrong about much, and she was not wrong here. She saw the dip swim up clear in the brass, and was quiet a moment with it. Then she did a thing that mattered more than either of them said aloud. She went to her own kit and brought out her depth line, her differently knotted version of the lead-weighted line in his roll, and the two of them worked the toe of the dike together, his level reading the crown, her line reading the scour where the river was eating the dike's foot out from under it. Two crafts that the frontier had spent 100 years keeping apart, bent over the same length of failing earth, each filling the gaps in the other's reckoning. He knew loads and lines and the settling of soft ground. She knew this water, these depths, the particular way this river had behaved every flood since before he was born, knowledge no instrument carried. "Your line says the scour pool is deeper than last week," he said. "How much deeper than the worst year?" She told him, in her reckoning. He converted it in his head and went still, and did not say the number aloud in front of Pip. "Tell me straight," Desha said. "You keep not saying things in front of the child." "Say them to me on the line, where she cannot hear, but say them." So he did, low, with the level between them like a thing they were both holding up. The dike would fail at the soft middle third, he told her. Not everywhere there, where the crown dipped and the toe was scoured. That was where the water would find first. When the dam upstream let go the rest of the way, and it would, the surge would top the low crown there before it topped anywhere else, and once it had a notch, it would open that notch like a man tearing wet paper, and the longhouses sat directly behind it. "How long?" she said. He gave her the honest answer, which was that he could not give her a day, only a range, and the range was short and getting shorter with every hand's width the river climbed. "Days," he said. "Not a season, not weeks, I think. Days, if the weather above us breaks the wrong way." It should have been the worst conversation of her week, and somehow it steadied her, because for 20 years she had been arguing with a silence, and here at last was a voice arguing back. Not a clerk's received and will be considered, but a man crouched in the mud beside her, saying the same numbers she carried in her bones, saying here, this is where, this is how long. "You have done this before," she said. "Told people a true thing they did not want about their own water." Aldo gave a short sound that was almost the ghost of a laugh. 20 years, he said. "It is most of what I am.
The man who tells you the wall is coming down. Nobody has ever once thanked me for it." He capped the level, and his ruined hands were steadier than they had been since the river. Steadier than the rest of him, busy. "They drowned me for it instead." "We are not going to drown you for it," Desha said. She said it the way she said everything she had decided, flat and final. And then, because it was true, and because he had earned the truth, she added the part that mattered.
"We are going to listen." It went through him like warmth into a man too long in cold water. That quiet, that absurd, that being useful to people who would not throw him away, did a thing to him that the bound ribs and the closing wound had not. For 2 days the settlement watched the Corps man on his stool reading their dike, with the keeper crouched beside him, and the watching changed by degrees from the watching of an enemy to the watching of a tool nobody had known they owned. Even Tennick, back from his day on the water and moving through his grief like a man through deep mud, came near enough one evening to listen without joining, and did not tell his sister to put the human out, which from Tennick was nearly an embrace. So let me put the question to you, because this story has its hook in me too, and maybe in you. When your own side closed ranks against you, when the people who were supposed to have your back let you go under, who turned out to be standing on the far bank, reaching? Was it the very ones you'd been taught your whole life to be afraid of? Sit with that a moment. And if a story about being thrown away by your own and taken in by the people you feared is one you want to ride all the way to its end, follow along and give it a like. It tells me to keep walking the line. That evening, Pip brought Aldo a depth stone from her aunt's spare basket and asked him, gravely, to carve a flood onto it the way Desha did, because he was a keeper now, and keepers carved the water. He had no answer for that either. He took the stone, and out on the dike in the failing light, the river climbed another hand's width up the scoured toe, quietly, the way it did everything, and neither keeper had to be told. The scout came in at dusk on the 3rd day, soaked to the thigh, and what he carried turned the slow dread of a failing dam into a thing with a clock ticking inside it. His name was Corv, a lean young orc who ran the clan's eyes along the frontier, and he would not sit and would not take the cup Desha held out until he had said it. He had gone up near the human works, close as a scout dared, and the talk on the wind was not of repairing the dam. It was of the contractor, the same comfortable man upstream, the one who had skimmed the maintenance coin for years. He had reported his troublesome Corps engineer drowned in an unfortunate accident, and the report had gone down easily. And now, with the crisis on him and the town frightened, he had found his way to be its hero. He meant to open the upstream sluices, pull the great gates, bleed the pressure off the failing reservoir before the whole thing let go on its own, save the human town, and send every drop of that relieved water down the course it would naturally take, south, down onto the low ground, onto the longhouses. Aldo understood it before Corv had finished, and the understanding put a color in his face that Desha had not seen there yet. "He is not even doing it to drown you," he said, and his voice came out flat and far away. "That is the part I need you to hear, because it is the worst part. There is no hate in it. He pulls those sluices to take the load off the dam and save his town, and the surge comes here, and he will never once have thought about this place, because on the authorities' maps this low ground is empty. There are no longhouses on their plan. There are no people here that anyone upstream is counting." He looked at the fire. "My own Corps. They will do, on purpose, to save themselves, the exact thing the broken dam would have done by accident. Open a gate and call it management. And the water does not know the difference, and neither will the record. It landed on the longhouse like a held breath let go. Tennick, who had come in from the dark to hear the scout, made a low sound and turned to the wall and put his fist against it. Not hard, just rested it there, a man bracing himself on something that would not move. The last flood had been the dam neglected. This one would be the dam used, the water aimed, his daughter's death repeated on purpose, and signed by a man who would sleep well after. "When?" he said, not turning. "When does he pull them?" Corv did not know the day. Soon. The reservoir was near the top of its wall. The storms above were not done, and a frightened contractor does not wait long. Days, the scout thought. Maybe less. "Then it agrees with the dike," Aldo said quietly. He had his book of swollen reports half dried now, and his own arithmetic, and the river's rate off Desha's line, and they all said the same short number. The natural break and the opened sluice come to the same window. We do not get the slow failure I was hoping to plan around. We get the surge, early, on a day a coward chooses, straight at the soft middle third of a dike I have already told you will not hold it. He set the book down. So the question stops being will it fail? It is going to fail. The question is what you do with the people in front of it. And that question fell, the way all the heavy ones did, onto Desha. She stood by the fire with her flood cord in one scarred hand, and turned it over the way she turned everything, slowly, and laid the two roads out for her own people in plain words, because they had a right to hear her think. The first road was to leave. Take the clan up to the high ground while there was still time, abandon the settlement to the water, save the people and lose the place. The stilt-long houses her grandmother's grandmother had raised, the weirs, the dikes built and rebuilt by every hand that had ever lived here, the whole made by us body of a people who lived nowhere else and were nobody anywhere else. "We have run before," she said. 4 winters back we ran, and the water took the lower house and a child, and we came back and built on the grief, because there is nowhere else for us to be. Run again, and there may be nothing to come back to. Stay, and the water may not leave anyone to come back at all." She was not asking permission. She was letting them see the weight before she carried it. "Those are the 2 roads. There is a third." It was Aldo. He had been quiet, doing the thing he did, the thing that had got him drowned, looking at a problem that everyone else saw as a wall, and seeing, the way only his trade saw, a place where the wall had a seam. "You are both reckoning this as a fight you can only lose. Hold the dike or flee the dike. But you do not hold water that big by being stronger than it. Nobody does." "You hold it," he said, and now the engineer was fully awake in him, leaning forward against the rib's protest, his ruined hands shaping the river in the air over the fire. "By giving it somewhere else to go." He looked up at Desha, then at Tennick's turned back, then at the whole still room. "I have read your ground for 3 days. There is a third road, and only a keeper would see it. And you have lived on top of it your whole lives without needing it until now." He let it hang one beat, the way you do when the thing you are about to say will cost everyone in the room their next 2 days, and maybe their lives. "Where does that old dead channel run? The silted-up one, north of the marsh. The one your weirs ignore. Who dug that?" Because somebody dug that, and they did not dig it for nothing. Desha went still. She knew the channel. Everyone in the clan knew it as a useless thing, a ditch the ancestors had cut and the river had abandoned, choked with reed and silt for 3 generations. She had never once thought of it as anything but ground that grew bad reeds. She looked at the human by her fire, and at the long failing dike beyond the door, and at the wrong river climbing in the dark, and felt the third road open under her like a gate she had been standing on her whole life, without knowing it was a gate. He laid it out at first light, on the ground itself, because a plan like this had to be walked before anyone could believe it. Aldo went on Desha's arm and a cut staff, ribs strapped, slower than he wanted, north along the dike to where the dead channel began, and standing at its choked mouth with the brass level in his hand and his half-dried book under his arm, he stopped being the river's imposed debt and became, in front of the whole gathered clan, the only thing he had ever been good at, the man who knew how the water would move, and how to move it first. "Your ancestors cut this," he said. He had read it in the lay of the ground before Desha confirmed it off the cord. The oldest dark stone 3 generations back, and after that flood someone had dug this overflow course to bleed a killing river safely past the longhouses and out into the dead marsh. And then the quieter years had come, and the channel had silted, and the reeds had taken it, and the clan had forgotten it was ever a tool, and remembered it only as ground that grew nothing good. They cut it for exactly this, and then the river was kind for 60 years, and you let it close. That is not a fault. That is how every overflow channel in the world dies, from good luck. He set the level and sighted the slope of the old course down toward the marsh, and what he saw made him nod once, the first hopeful thing his face had done. It still falls the right way. The grade is good. The river still wants to come down here if you give it the door. We do not have to fight the surge. We have to reopen this channel, all of it, down to the old bed, and cut the last plug at the right instant, and the water will split. Half down the dead channel into the marsh where it can drown nothing but reeds, half past the longhouses, low enough that your dike can hold what is left. He looked up. That is the third road. It is not a wall. It is a door. Tennick spoke from the back of the gathering, and his voice was the obstacle it had always been, except now the obstacle was honest arithmetic and not distrust. "How much do we dig?" he said. "Be plain. How much, how deep, how long is the channel, and how many days do we have?" Aldo gave him every number straight, the way he'd give a hostile board the figures it did not want, because Tennick had earned straight, and because a lie here drowned children. It was a vast cut. Generations of silt and root and reed, the length of the old course, down to a bed they could only guess at, hauled out by hand into spoil banks, the last plug left in place until the surge, so the marsh did not flood early and useless, and all of it in the short window the dam and the coward's sluices left them. "Every hand in the settlement," Aldo said, "old enough to lift, working 2 days and the night between. No fewer, and it has to be cut my way. The grade held true, the plug left where I say, the spoil set where it will not wash back. Because I have done this, and you have not. And the water does not forgive a channel dug by feeling." He said the last part looking straight at Tennick, because that was the real ask under the dirt and numbers ask, and both of them knew it. There it was, then, the whole story bent down to a single point, and the point was a spade and a man's outstretched hand. Aldo, the Corps engineer, the badge that had ignored their petitions for 20 years, the side that had drowned its own honest man and meant now to drown the clan to save its town,
was standing at the mouth of their ancestors' channel, telling the orcs to put every life they had into the ground and dig it his way, on his word, under his direction, for 2 days, with the killing water rising the whole time. And the man who had to answer was not Desha. Desha had decided days ago. The clan knew her mind.
The answer had to come from the one who had wanted him thrown back on the weir. Because if Tennick took up a spade, every wary heart behind him would take one up too. And if Tennick refused, no law of his sisters could make a frightened people dig their own lives into a dead man's ditch. Tennick stood a long moment at the channel's edge. He looked at the human, really looked, the way he had not let himself the first night, past the badge to the strapped ribs and the staff and the steady, ruined hands. He looked at the dead channel his ancestors had cut and his own years had let close. He looked last and longest, north and upstream, toward the dam that had taken his daughter and the comfortable man who would open the sluices and never count her, never count any of them, as people whose drowning was worth an afternoon. The grief was still on him. It would always be on him. But grief, Desha had taught him without ever saying it, was only water, and water you either let drown you or you dug it a door. He did not make a speech. Tennick was not built for speeches. His loud was talk, and his quiet was the true thing. And the truest thing he ever said, he said now without a word. He walked down the bank to where the tools were stacked, and he took up a long-handled spade, and he turned and drove it into the choked mouth of the dead channel. The first cut, the deepest, the one that said, "We are doing this." And he levered up a black, wet slab of 3 generations' silt and threw it onto the spoil bank, exactly where the human had pointed. Then he set his boot to the blade and cut again. Behind him, all down the gathered line, the clan let out a breath together and reached for their spades, and the dead channel that had grown nothing good for 60 years took its first bite of iron in the gray morning light. Aldo stood leaning on his staff at the channel mouth with the level in his hand, watching an orc settlement begin, on his word, to dig for its life. And he had to look away at the river for a moment, because a man who has been thrown away by his own people does not have ready the face for what it is to be trusted, all at once, by the ones he was raised to fear. Out past the spoil banks, the wrong river climbed another hand's width up the scoured toe. None of them had to be told. They dug. 3:53. They dug for 2 days, and the night between, and the river did not once stop climbing while they did it. It was the hardest labor any of them had given, and Aldo set the shape of it the way a keeper sets a work line, not by strength, which would burn them out by midday, but by sequence, by rotation, by the unglamorous arithmetic of how much a tired body can lift before it starts lifting wrong. He could not dig. The ribs forbade it, and he did not pretend otherwise. He did the thing he could do, which was stand at the channel with the level and keep the grade true, walking the cut on his staff, calling the depth at each span, sending the diggers deeper here and easing them off there so the old bed fell the right way for the whole of its length. Desha worked the water end with her depth line, reading the rising river against the channel mouth, the 2 keepers passing judgment back and forth across the dig the way they'd read the dike together, his grade and her water, neither complete without the other. The clan dug in shifts around the failing light and the lit pitch torches and the rain that came and went. Children hauled the small spoil in reed baskets. Pip ran water and tools the length of the cut and reported the river's height back to her aunt in her own grave reckoning, fearless on the spoil banks. The old ones who could not dig packed the riverside dike higher behind them. The holding work, the second line for the half of the surge that would still come past the longhouses. Tennick dug at the hard heart of it and did not stop, hardly slept,
drove himself at the channel like a man trying to dig his way down to something he had lost in it. And Aldo, who understood that better than he could say, led him, and only moved him off the line when his cuts started going crooked with exhaustion. And Tennick let himself be moved, which from Tennick was the whole of trust. They left the plug. That was the thing Aldo would not let them forget through all of it. The last short wall of earth at the channel's river mouth, uncut, holding the new course dry so the marsh did not flood early and useless, and so the channel was ready the instant the surge came and not a moment before.
"We do not open the door," he said, hoarse on the second night, walking the finished cut by torchlight to check the grade one last time, "until the water is at the door. Cut the plug too soon, and we have dug a ditch for nothing and drowned the marsh while the real surge still finds the longhouses. Too late, and it tops the dike before the channel can take the load." He looked at the dark river and the dark dam he could not see beyond it. "The whole thing comes down to one cut at one instant, and I will know the instant by the water, and so will she, and we will agree or we will not, and if we agree, we live." It came early, of course. The coward upstream did not wait. Midway through the second night, the river changed its voice. Desha heard it before any instrument said it, that fat, swallowing churn, deepening into a roar with a new weight under it. And she knew the gates were open before Corv came running down the bank shouting it. The sluices. The contractor had pulled them to save his town, and the relieved reservoir was coming down the natural course all at once. The surge they had 2 more days to be ready for, arriving in the dark of the night, they were not finished. "Plug holds!" Aldo shouted over the rising water. "Everyone off the channel! Off the channel! Up the bank! Leave the spades!" And the clan came up out of the cut they had dug for their lives, as the river behind them began to swell against the dike's scoured middle third. The soft place. The place he had told them on the first morning the water would find first. He stood at the plug with Desha, the two of them reading the same dark water, his eye on the dike's low crown, her line in the rising river, both of them watching for the one instant. The water climbed the scoured toe. It found the slump in the crown. It began, exactly as he had said it would 3 days ago, on a stool by her fire. To top the soft middle third, a thin black tongue of it spilling over toward the longhouses. And Aldo lifted his hand and did not drop it. Not yet. Not yet. Because too soon was death as surely as too late. And Desha beside him called the river's height off her line in a voice flat as stone. 1 span. Half a span. And on the breath where his judgment and her judgment arrived at the same instant in the same dark. Now. He dropped his hand, and Tennick and Corv drove the cutting bars into the last plug and broke it through. The channel took the water like a throat. The river found its ancestor's door and went for it, and the surge split at the channel mouth the way Aldo had drawn it in the air over the fire, half roaring down the dead course into the marsh, drowning nothing but reeds, and half held low enough past the longhouses that the dike, packed high by the old hands, held what was left. It held. The black tongue over the crown thinned and stopped and drew back. The settlement stood in the roar and the torchlight and the driving rain and watched a flood that had been built to erase them pour itself harmlessly into a dead marsh on a road their grandparents had cut and a stranger had remembered for them. They were soaped and half drowned again and standing. That was the whole of it. That was everything. Aldo sat down hard on the spoil bank because his legs had finished, and watched the split river run safe in the dark, and could not have said a word if his life had asked it. At the channel mouth, Tennick stood over the broken plug with the cutting bar still in his hands, chest heaving, looking at the marsh swallowing the water that should have swallowed his people, and after a moment he set the bar down and came along the bank to where the last sandbag of the holding line lay waiting to be heaved up onto the crown. He bent to it. Aldo, finding the last of himself somewhere, got up and took the other end without being asked. The two of them lifted it together and set it on the dike, and the river ran by below them in the dark, split and beaten, and neither man said anything at all, because there was nothing left to say that the sandbag had not already said. The flood receded the way every flood does, slowly, sullenly, leaving its mark a hand's width higher up the longhouse stilts than any mark before it, and then a little lower each gray morning until the river was only a river again. The settlement stood. The dead channel, scoured clean now by the surge it had carried, ran wet and open down to the marsh, an old tool remembered. Desha carved the new flood onto the cord with her own hands, a depth stone for the year the water came aimed and did not take them, and when she had cut it, she set it on the string beside the dark one, the 4 winters one, and let her thumb rest a moment between the 2 stones, the flood that took a child and the flood that did not take any one, and did not say what was in her, and did not have to. It should have ended there, and in the old shape of this kind of story it would have. The settlement saved, the human healed, the warmth settled in by the fire. But Aldo lay awake on the reed mat those first quiet nights, with the thing he knew sitting on his chest heavier than the cracked ribs. And on the 3rd quiet morning he said it out, because he was a plain man and could not hold a true thing in once he had seen it. "The dam is still failing," he said. Desha was mending a weir line by the door. She did not stop her hands, but she listened the way she listened to water. "We split one surge. We did not fix the thing that made it. That dam goes on leaking worse every season, and next year, or the year after, it lets go the rest of the way, and the channel buys you one flood, not every flood. And there is no channel that saves the human villages on the far bank who get no warning at all." He stared at the reed ceiling. "And upstream, right now, the man who opened those sluices is being called the hero who saved the town. The corps that drowned me is writing it down that way. The truth is at the bottom of your marsh with the reeds." He turned his head and looked at her. "I am a dead man, Desha, officially. I could stay down here, safe, alive, let it lie. Keep your dikes, mend your weirs, be the marsh that swallowed me." Nobody upstream would ever come looking for a corpse. He let that sit. And the dam kills people on both banks the year after next, while a comfortable man takes the credit. I cannot. The old trait, the one that drowned him, surfacing one more time. I cannot stand to watch a thing break that I know how to fix. I have to go back up and lay it in front of the one authority above the contractor, the Water Commission, the board that can order the dam rebuilt and put that man's name where it belongs.
"Walk back upstream a dead man," Tennick said from the doorway. He had a way of arriving for the heavy ones. "Into the laps of the people who drowned you, and ask them politely to believe you over a hero?" It was not scorn. It was a brother's plain accounting of the danger, the same flat undervoice he'd used about the torches on the first night. "They will say you are an imposter, or a deserter, or they will simply finish what the river started."
"They will say all of that," Aldo agreed, "to my reports. A drowned engineer's old complaints."
but not to your cord." He sat up against the ribs. 20 years of core petitions in your dry bundle, with their own badge on the answers.
100 years of flood records carved by a keeper who never had reason to lie, that show every worst flood coming faster as the dam failed. The dead channel scoured open that proves the surge was aimed, and a live engineer standing in the room who can read all three out loud and make them agree. He looked at Desha. "One of those they bury, all of them at once, with a living man and a living keeper standing behind them. That the commission above the contractor cannot file at the appropriate time, not with both of us in the room." He said the next part more quietly. "I cannot do it without the record, and the record is yours. I am not asking the clan to fight. I am asking the keeper of the downstream water to come upstream with me and put her stones on the table beside my reports, in front of the people who ignored us both, and be ignored to our faces, together, where they cannot pretend neither of us exists." It was a great deal to ask, and they all knew the size of it. A clan matriarch walking willingly into the human town that had spent 20 years pretending her people were empty ground, carrying her clan's 100-year memory in her 2 hands, to stand beside a human in front of the badge that had answered her only ever with silence. Desha set the weir line down. She looked at the cord on the wall, the new stone and the dark one. She looked at her brother, who had buried a daughter to that dam's neglect, and had every reason to say, "Let the upstream rot." And Tennick, who understood her before she spoke, only said, low, "Take Corv for the road, and take the dark stone too, the 4 winters one. Let them look at it while you talk." Which was Tennick's way of saying yes, and here is my daughter's flood to lay on their table, and was the most he could give, and the most that needed giving. So it was decided, the way Desha decided everything, slow and then final. She would go upstream. She would carry the cord. A human engineer and an orc keeper, the 2 water readers that one in different authority had drowned in silence for 20 years apiece, would walk back into that authority's own house together, and make it look at what it had refused to see, not as petitioner and petitioner, each alone and ignorable, but as 2 keepers of the same river, standing on the same side of it at last, in front of the people who had taught them they could never be. She rolled the dry bundle of his reports together with her bundle of petitions, his swollen book drying beside her water-foxed papers, the 2 records of one long, unheard argument, bound now into a single thing too heavy to file away. Then she lifted the flood cord down off the wall, and weighed it once in her scarred hands, and put it over her shoulder, and looked at the dead man she had hooked out of her river, and said, "Then we had better go and be ignored to their faces." The Water Commission could not ignore them, in the end, for the plainest reason. It is one thing to file a drowned man's old complaints, and another to have the drowned man standing in your hall reading them aloud beside a gray-green keeper who lays 100 years of carved river onto your table, 1 stone at a time. It did not go gently. There were the days Tennick had warned of, the official who called Aldo an impostor, until Aldo named the foreman and the spillway and the exact orders of the night he went into the water. The clerk who would not look at Desha until she set the dark 4 winter stone down in front of him and told him, flat in his own tongue, whose flood it was and what the dam's neglect had cost a child he had never counted. But the records agreed with each other, and that was the thing no comfortable lie could survive. The core petitions and the clan petitions, bearing the same badge and the same dead answer. The worst floods coming faster down 100 years of carved stone exactly as a failing dam would make them come, the scoured channel proving the surge was aimed, and 2 living keepers who read all 3 out loud until they sang the same note. The commission, which sat above the contractor and did not love being made a fool of by a man it had paid, did the arithmetic of its own survival. The contractor fell. The stolen years came out. The dam was ordered rebuilt, properly, under inspection. And, for the first time in the authorities' existence, the low ground below it was surveyed and written into the flood plan as a place where people lived. The Orc settlement entered on the map in a clerk's neat hand as a thing that could drown, which is to say, as a thing that was real. They offered Aldo his life back. That was the part he had not let himself expect. Quiet reinstatement, his rank restored, his name cleared, a post upstream, and the comfortable understanding that the unpleasantness of his drowning would not be discussed. The safe thing. The thing 20 years of loyal service had earned and been refused, and was now, conveniently, on offer the moment he had become useful again. He stood in the commission hall with the badge he had bled for held out to him on a clerk's open palm, and he looked at it a long moment, and he thought of the men who had walked him out to the spillway, who still wore that same badge, who would pass him in a corridor and nod. A man who has seen his own side that clearly cannot unsee it. He had served a side for 20 years, and the side had thrown him in a river. He did not reach for the badge. He thanked them, plainly, and left it on the palm. He walked out of the human town with the Orc keeper beside him and the road south under his feet, and he did not look back at it. And the not looking was easy in a way that surprised him, because the thing he was walking toward had become, somewhere in the digging and the holding, more his than anything upstream had ever been. It was Desha he walked back down to, but it was Tennick he had to ask, and he knew it. The closing had to come from the one who had wanted him thrown back, or it meant nothing. On the clear morning after they returned, with the dikes strong along the low ground and the new channel running open and Pip turning cartwheels on the spoil bank, Aldo found Tennick mending a weir at the water's edge, and crouched down beside him and asked, not for a hearth, not for a household, but for the only thing he had ever known how to ask anyone for: work. To stay downstream and rebuild the settlement's dikes the way they should have been built 100 years ago. To be their keeper of works, the human who lived among them and read their water with them. "I have no people upstream," he said. "I left the badge on the table. I am asking to keep your river. If you will have a man your side has every reason to throw back." Tennick did not stop mending the weir at first. He worked the line through his scarred fingers the way his sister worked everything, slow and then done. Then he set it down and reached to his own throat and lifted off the keeper's cord he wore, the clan's, with a single new depth stone on it, freshly carved, the one Desha had cut for the year the water came aimed and did not take them. He held it out to the human across the weir he was mending. "The river law," Tennick said, and there was the ghost of the old fight in his voice, worn down now into something else. "You heard it on the first night, on the weir, when she gave it to me as the reason she would not throw you back. I have a new one." He put the cord in Aldo's ruined, capable hands and closed the man's fingers over the new stone with his own broad ones. "The river gave you to us," he said. "We're done arguing with the river." And that was the whole of it. That was everything. There was nothing left to say that the cord had not already said. So here is the last thing I will ask you, before I let this one go. Aldo never got the household, never got the hearth, never got the soft, warm ending the stories promise. He got a river to keep, and a people who counted him as one of their keepers. And for a man who had only ever wanted his good work to matter to someone who would not throw him away, that was the warmer thing by far. Maybe you know the difference. Maybe you have learned, the hard way, that the people who take you in are not always the ones who were supposed to, and that being useful to someone who stays beats being praised by someone who would let you drown. If a story about being thrown away by your own and made a keeper by the people you feared meant something to you, leave it a like and walk the next dike with me. There is always another one downstream. The last image is a clear day after the flood season, the kind the river people wait all the wet months for. The rebuilt dike runs strong and true along the low ground, no dip in its crown now. The soft middle third dug out and set right by a man who could not stand to watch a thing break that he knew how to fix. Aldo and Desha walked the line together at dawn with their 2 kits of instruments. His brass level, her carved depth stones. Checking the water side by side, 2 keepers of the same craft on the same bank at last, neither one alone in the silence anymore. Pip runs the dike top ahead of them, fearless, wet to the knees as ever. Downstream, Tennick mends a weir and lifts a hand without turning around. And far upstream, where the trouble had always come from, the dam stands wrapped in scaffolding and inspectors, finally being made right. Aldo stops a moment on the strong dike in the early light and looks at the river running easy below him, the river that took his old life and handed him this one, and he does not serve a side anymore. He serves the water now, and the people the water spared.